In this session, I want to talk about Azure Service Bus Relay. Azure Service Bus Relay comes from Azure ecosystem and it belongs to the Service Bus family. So as we know, Service Bus has a lot of different features, one of which is Service Bus Relay. So the interesting part about Azure Service Bus is Relay is that it's not been discussed much, and one of the potential reason why that's the case is because it's dedicated for a very specific use case, which is mostly around hybrid integration. This in this session, I would discuss like I would be presenting more around the demos and stuff, not realistically on the presentation or the documentation side because there are heaps and heaps of information available in Microsoft Docs. So I can provide the links to that, but yeah, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and go through the documentation stuff. So going forward with this, so this is the problem statement which we come across when we are dealing with enterprise systems and enterprise data sources. So as you can see on the left side, we have an enterprise environment. We have a firewall, we have all the security, we have a couple of data sets, and there are a couple of data in the file as well. Now, when we talk about the cloud embracement, in that case, it's good for every greenfield, but if we want to consume the existing resources, it becomes a bit of a challenge because these resources sit behind the firewall and behind the security of the enterprise network. So one of the way how it has been done till date is if you're using IaaS, like you provision your own VM in Azure, GCP, or AWS, then you create a dedicated network connection, which can be through express route or something else. And then using that, you can connect to the on-prem enterprise network and access the data and all that stuff. Now, the challenge is a bit big if you are trying to consume the PaaS offerings which each of these cloud providers provide. Now, when we talk about the PaaS offerings, and I'll not walk through like talk about in depth about the PaaS, but PaaS refers to platform as a service. Cloud providers, they have the platform as a service where you can provision these services and then you can consume it. The best part about them is that you don't have to bother about the infrastructure, you don't have to bother about the VMs and stuff on which these services are running. So when we are dealing with such things, one of the important item to understand in the past world is that it mostly is running on the internet, like the public infrastructure. Now, you can secure it, and there are a couple of nitty-gritty details, but on a general note, it runs on a public internet sort of infrastructure. So when we are trying to access these enterprise resources, none of the enterprise will let you access these resources from a public hosted application or stuff. So that becomes a bottleneck. So you cannot leverage the PaaS offerings, and then you have to stick back with only the IaaS, and that has its own challenges and headaches, which is like managing the VM, managing infrastructure, and all that stuff. Now, one of the ideal desire for any implementation team and design team is that if we can use these PaaS offerings because they will reduce the headache and also the reduce the amount of costing and stuff in respect to a project implementation and application life cycle management. So we would use something also one of the PaaS offerings, and in this case I've just presented the Azure based PaaS offerings, which might be Azure Function, website, Azure Web Apps, API apps, or app service plan. Now, if you're deploying your application, which might be a website or a service or something, and you want to access these resources inside the enterprise, which might be a SQL database or some files running, sitting behind the firewall, uh, you will not be allowed to do so. And it's a very valid scenario because every enterprise wants to secure these data sets, and they don't want everyone to just reach through to them through internet or stuff. So in that case, now in order to solve that problem, Azure Service Bus is one of the potential component which you can use and you can sort it out. So in a simplistic world, the way how Azure Service Bus works is uh, Azure Service. So just a bit of a background about Service Bus. So Azure Service Bus is not something which is using the underhood technology is not something which is totally new or built from scratch. It has already existed for a while. If you have been using Window Communication Foundation, which is also referred to as WCF from the Microsoft .NET world, they have different ways in which you can connect to the WCF service, which again runs on a service-oriented architecture and SOAP-based model. So WCF services had a very specific way how you could communicate to them, and that was referred to as bindings. So there were HTTP binding if you want to make a HTTP request. There were NetTCP and a lot of different other bindings. One of the very specific bindings which WCF enabled was referred to as NetTCP Relay Binding. Now, the way how this relay binding works is when you execute or when you initiate the WCF service from any environment, uh, for the specific use case of Azure Service Bus, what happens is you create a WCF service, you provide it relay binding, and then when you initiate the service, what it does is it tries to get outside on the using the outbound communication channels available in on the whatever infrastructure you have executed it, which might be a VM in most of the cases. So from the VM, it will try to use the outbound channel, and it will try to connect to the service bus relay endpoint, which is provided on in the WCF configuration. And I'll show you all these details in the code when I'll be presenting the demos. So in a nutshell, what happens is you have a VM inside your enterprise network. You deploy your WCF service on that, and then that WCF service, when it gets initiated, it connects to the Azure Service Bus Relay available in the cloud. And from the Azure Service Bus Relay, that connection can be used to connect to any of the PaaS services from any of the cloud provider, which can be Azure, GCP, or AWS, which I have presented in the third box. Now, the way how it works is whenever you make a request, so take for an example, if you want to get some data from one of the databases in the enterprise network, so from the PaaS service or web application or whatever you have in the PaaS, you will make a request to get the data. So when you make the request, there will be a notification which will be pushed into the Azure Service Bus queue. So it will be it has its own queue model which it manages, and then WCF will basically continue to poll this particular queue and see if there is any new message which has been received by the message service bus relay queue. So once it sees a new message, it takes the message and it sees, okay, there is a request which is made for a specific table in the database. It goes and grabs the data from that, and then using the same outbound channel, it sends the data back to the service bus relay, which in then routes the data back to the PaaS service. Now, the important question is like, because it's using all the channel of HTTP and communication and whatnot, how exactly it's more beneficial? So the beauty about this is when you deploy a WCF service inside your enterprise network and you want to make the connection with the Azure Service Bus Relay, you do not need to open any of the inbound channels or anything, because as I said in this use case, in this example, that PaaS request service bus relay sends a message, and service bus relay then pushes then provides the message to WCF. So if that would be a normal case, then you should have an inbound outbound channel both open inside your network, and that would be a firewall rule change and whatnot. But when we use Azure Service Bus Relay and WCF, we do not need to make any changes in the inbound communication. What it does is WCF, when it initiates, it makes an outbound communication to the Azure Service Bus Relay, and then it creates that channel open for infinity time. Now, what that means is it will initiate the channel, and then channel will be used for duplex communication, which will be like for all the inbound and outbound. Now, if in some case the channel drops, then in that case, WCF will reinitiate the channel and recreate the connectivity. So it just runs on the outbound channel, but internally it uses both inbound and outbound communication messages and all that stuff. So, all right, so let's land up to the final part, which I think so will be the most part of the presentation will be around that. It's around the demo. I've just tried to present a simple architecture, what exactly we are trying to do. So take for an example, the same analogy of web application. I have deployed a web application which uses the internet. It tries to get the data from a Azure SQL database sitting inside enterprise network. In a direct fashion, it will never be possible because the firewall rules inside the virtual network will not let that communication happen. So in that case, what we do is we use an Azure Service Bus Relay. The web app calls the Service Bus Relay. Service Bus Relay then calls the WCF listener, which is on the inside the VNet on the top. And then that WCF listener communicates with the SQL instance. Because they are sitting inside the same network, the accessibility is much possible. Now, once the data is extracted out by this WCF listener from the SQL database, it pushes it back to the Service Bus Relay. Service Bus Relay then pushes it back to the web app. So that's in a nutshell what we will be seeing in the demo. So let me switch on to the demo thing. And yeah, so over here what you're seeing is just a simple application, simple solution which has two separate projects. So one of the projects is the API project, and that API project, if I would correlate, is basically this web app. And the other one is the listener, which would correlate to this WCF listener over here. So what I'm trying to, so the first thing what I'll show is I'll run this web app, and so if you see over here, this web app has a controller, gateway controller, and that controller has a couple of methods for the presentation and the context, current context. What we will focus on will be this specific method, which is get client from data DB. So this client DB is basically trying to connect to the database. As you can see, it's simple ADA.NET connectivity. It's trying to run a select query on the database, and then once the query is executed, it'll get some data in the result set, and then it'll try to push it into a list, and from the list it will reply back the list to the API caller. So this is in a nutshell what's happening, and I'll just show you the database as well. So this is the database. I have made some mock entries into the database. I have a table dbo.client, and I have 5 records in that. So ideally, if the connectivity and everything is fine, it should provide me the data back. So if I just run this, and yep, so the web application is starting. So I'll run the get client DB. If I'll try this, and it will come over here, and it's, as you can see, if I run this, it should show an error message. So it says cannot open the server relay SRV request by login, client IP address, it's not allowed. So it's more about the security. Now I'll show you the database as well, why exactly the database was not letting us in when I'm trying, and I'm running it on my local machine, so it's using the it's using the network, like the local internet which I have on my machine, and it's a public internet. It's not any corporate or anything. Any sort of restrictions are not there. So if you see over here, that's the server which it was talking about. And if I come over here, and okay, just to give you a background, this is a Azure SQL database I have provisioned, and the database over here, it's Azure SQL. I have made a couple of entries, and that's the same what I'm showing through the portal. So what I wanted to show is what I've done is I have enabled VNet, and so okay, let me walk you through the infrastructure first. So this is the resource group I've created for this particular demo. I have a database server, Azure SQL database server. I have Azure SQL database. This is my Relay VNet, which is custom VNet I have created. I have a VM which is sitting inside that VNet, and I have also enabled this VNet on top of this database. So this database is only accessible by resources which are sitting on the same network, which can be considered as this VM. Now, so since the database is logged down to the VNet, so since I'm running it on my local machine, it gave me that error. So now if I flip back, and if I show you on the portal itself, what I have done is I've also created a service bus relay. So this over here is the service bus relay. Now if you go through the different options available over here, you have an option to have a hybrid connection. For this demo purpose, I'm using WCF relays. So the WCF relay is quite straightforward. You can get the direct code from the Microsoft sites as well. They have provided all the code, but what I'll show you over here is a sample which I have created. Now, as I said, it's a WCF service, and if you have had any experience in the past with the WCF, and it's not quite different, it's just a SOA architecture, what it works on. It has data contracts and data members, on which are mostly can be correlated to a model in the new world. These are the service contracts which can be considered as the REST methods, like comparable to the REST methods. And then there is an interface which basically uses these contracts and data members and data contracts. Now, if I go on the implementation of this WCF service, There are different ways how you can host WCF service. For the demo, I'm just using the self-hosting. You can deploy it on an IaaS server as well, whatever suits you. Uh, so just looking at the implementation side, what I have done is I have this one specific method, get client, and that get client method is what the API will be talking to. The get client method, what it does is it makes a call to this get clients from SQL. And what I've done is I've created this one method, and it's using the same code as I showed you on the API layer. So it uses ADO.NET connection, tries to get the data from the database, connect to the database, get the data from the database from the from the table DBO client, and once it gets the data, it creates a list and send it back to the caller. So there are a couple of more methods which are mostly around file movement and stuff. For the demo, I'm just walking through around the SQL side of things. So you can do the same with the files. You can send a command to move a file or create a file, and then it can be done inside the network as well, enterprise network as well. So that's the simple code on the and now this is the important one, I think. So the binding thing which I wanted to show. So if you see this is the net TCP relay binding, which is very important in order to communicate with the service bus relay. So what you do is you provide the relay endpoint, which is so your service bus relay name. That's the default URL for the service bus relay, and that's the endpoint, which would be dependent on the contract which you are creating. So if I go over here, I have a client contract, and that's what I'm referring to over here. So it uses the client's contract. Now, and these are all basic WCF or WCF things, which if you would have used in the past, it is exactly the same. You also need to provide your service bus relay key. So you need to have the key. Once you have provisioned the service bus relay on the portal, you can get the keys from the shared access policies over here. So that's the thing which we have over here. And the other part which I'll show is, now let's talk about another method which we have in the same API layer. So this was the get client DB, which doesn't work because the database is inside a VNet, dedicated VNet. Now what we have over here is get clients, and I'm doing the same request. I'm trying to get the data for the different get the different client as a list from the data source. Now, instead of using a AD.NET connection, you can see I'm using a channel create, which again is a WCF acronyms and jargons. So channels and stuff. It was like these are just WCF things. What these channels are? These are the communication endpoints where you make a request, and then once the channel is created, then you make a request to a specific. So that's the get client endpoint where the request is made, and then you get whatever information or stuff which you pass to the channel. Over here I'm passing a model, and I tell the action as well, and I'm saying to read and all that stuff. So it's as simple as like just making a command to the specific endpoint and getting the response back. Now, the channel itself, which I'm using over here, it's initiated, it's just initialized uh, setup over here, but I cannot show the initialization process because I have my keys and all that stuff inside that. But yeah, in the code base in GitHub, which I'll put the link in the video as well, you can get all the code base which I'm showing you over here. So what in that you need to do is you need to provide the same details as I showed you in the application, yeah, in the app config. So you need to provide these keys, and you need to provide the service bus endpoint. That's what is set up in the API layer as well. Inside this controller method, I have the set up those attributes inside the channel client channel. So yeah, so that's I think so it from the explanation side. What I'll do is I'll run this, and I'm pretty sure it should give an exception because and I'll tell you once the exception comes up. When I run this, if I go and I get clients, if I say try, yep, and if I go on, Yep, so there is some exception. So it says endpoint was not found, and yeah, that's very logical. Endpoint does not exist. And the thing what it is saying is that if you see over here, I do not see any instance available for the API, web API to connect to and create a channel. Now, what I have done is I have just build this WCF application, the same WCF self-hosted application. And if you see what this application does is when you initialize this application, when you run this, it will say press enter to close. And yeah, that's a default message, but it is continuously listening to the service bus relay, which is this particular thing over here. So what I've done is, as I said, I have a VM inside the same VNet as the SQL instance. And what I'm referring to is, yeah, I'm referring to this VM. So the relay VM, it's inside the same VNet, and it is obviously the database is also in the same VNet. So the relay VM can talk to this database over here. So if I come back over here, and if I so what I've done is I've built the relay listener, and I'm just initiating that over here now. So once I initiate it over here, like if everything goes right, it should be visible in the portal and it should register this WCF service listener should register itself with the service bus relay endpoint. So if I come back into the service bus relay, and if I go to WCF, and yep, so now if you can see over here, I have a client, one client's endpoint which is registered. There is one listener. It is using NetTCP, and it's is dynamic and all that stuff. So that's all set for us now. Now, if we come back to our API, web API application again, I'll run it again, and I'll put a breakpoint as well over here. Yeah, I already have that. So if I come back over here, if I say, this is the same method which am initiating. If I say try it now, and if it goes back over here, so as you can see, it is going back to the channel factory, and it's trying to set up a channel between the API and the Azure Service Bus Relay on the Azure portal. So it tries to create the channel all good. Yeah, so it's now executing the command, and no smoking mirrors. I'll show you that. So if you see over here, the service bus relay listener which I've initiated, I've done some console.write, so it calls the get client command, and then it also gets the 4 data set in the response. So these are the different attributes which I'm getting back, values I'm getting back. Now if I run this in my API response, so if you see this client code CLI 1, 2, and 3, and if I go back over here, I'm getting CLI 1, 2, 3. So this it's running through the service bus relay endpoint. Now, so this is running on my local machine. I can access the data and I can get the reply back. So just to validate again, if I go and click the one which was directly communicating with the database, it it doesn't work because technically it should not, because it doesn't have access. So since I'm running through the service bus relay, it goes to so the way how it works is, I'll go back to the deck again. So the way how it works is web app calls through the internet the service bus relay calls the WCF listener gets the data from the database, and then the entire cycle goes back to the web app. So that's how the API is getting back the data. So if I run this again, I should get another set of console, right? And yeah, that's what the message shows. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's how service bus relay works. It's a really great technology if you are trying to use hybrid connections, and if you're trying to use enterprise resources with PaaS services, or any application or service or a platform which cannot be deployed inside the enterprise network. So take for an example your SaaS services, SaaS offering, all the SaaS providers, they might be ready to provide you the installation inside your network, but there are scenarios where they want to centralize, deploy it as a centralized application. And I think so there are a lot of examples. You go with the Workday, which is HC systems, it's all centralized. You go with Salesforce. So all these systems, if you want to connect to their enterprise resources, you might have to build big integrations where you will be taking the data from the enterprise and putting it into these SaaS or providers side system, and then again the two flow would be quite challenging. With all these technologies like Service Bus Relay, you can build these listeners, and then the SaaS providers or the any of the public internet hosted things would be able to communicate with these listeners, and then the listeners can reply back with the relevant message. So what I've shown you is just the tip of the iceberg. You can have all the security and all written inside your listener, and you can validate all that. But yeah, just to give a brief overview and high level understanding, that's what I wanted to do with this particular presentation. um, what I'll do is I've already put all this code which you're seeing on the screen at my GitHub repo. So if I go over here and if I see, yeah, so I've already placed the code base, the same project. So if you see over here, it has the Relay API, Relay Listener. I've also placed the database things, so seed and the table. So you can just download the code, create a database, put the table and seed the table, and then run these application. And obviously you'll have to provision these this Azure Service Bus Relay and all that stuff to work it out. So yeah, that's all I have for this demo. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and yeah, let me know for any questions or queries you have. Put a message in the comment area, and I'll definitely try to reply back. Thanks a lot for your time, and have a great day.